So now we will begin with the Vajra lineage prayer. So please recite this with faith and devotion, and please keep in mind the points that we spoke about last week. And I just realized I have not got everything ready quite yet. Let me escape out of there. Get things ready. There we go. Now it's ready. Now I can share the screen. It'll look more professional. Share. Vajra Vidya Portland, Gom Shalutan Ravajinjilo Nam Doi Ngo Chigur Sun Bashin Jiyang Ma Yin Jiryan Charwa Mangarumbar Charvi Gonchema Corder Medobar Jinjil Kewa Gundu Yanda Matam Drame Chudi Pala Satang Mamji Yende Razone Dorje Changin Gompa Yor Kosho Dorje Changin Gompa Nyoto Shatsa Vadan Chichi Shapadan Jizu Yira Guji Sovai Gewa Chungze Dagi Jisamba Tangje Dagi Chanju Chirho Zaji Puju Juji Meto Chang Rira Liji Nide Yemba De Sangye Shingdu Mite Puvai Yoga Nanda Shina Jiva Sho Senche Namgi Sambada Loyi Chera Jita War Chejun Tumon Tepai Shigi Kolo Kolo. The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the throat 3 times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. Now please think to yourselves that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of completely perfect enlightenment. Now the state of Buddhahood, the state of lasting happiness that will not, that cannot decay, does not end. And in order to do this, we ourselves need to achieve Buddhahood, which means we need to listen, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma. So think to yourselves that we are teaching and listening the Dharma this morning for this reason, of bringing all sentient beings to the state of Buddhahood, and therefore listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. Or as I said last night, with a good motivation, as good a motivation as you can get, as you actually have, with the consciousness that you can maybe improve your motivation. You're not fixed. That's why meditation works. It's habituation. The more you habituate yourself to something, the more you can do. That's the whole point of meditation. So when you think about your motivation, the motivation of bodhicitta, this motivation might seem strange and out of touch and difficult to achieve right now. But as we meditate upon it, as we habituate ourselves to it, we can actually come to develop true and genuine, uncontrived bodhicitta. It's possible to do this. And in order to meditate on bodhicitta, we need the instructions. And so that's what we are having now this weekend in our discussion on the Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. And of the 10 chapters, which we've been going through on an almost annual basis, we only missed 1 year because of the epidemic, because we did 1 year online. And so this year we are on the 8th chapter, the chapter on meditation. The main topic of this is the meditation on relative bodhicitta, but it begins, the chapter actually has 2 parts, essentially. The part on preparing yourself for meditation, gaining the solitude of body and mind that we discussed last weekend. And this weekend we're discussing the meditations on relative bodhicitta themselves. So the meditations on relative bodhicitta in themselves, although generally presented in terms of a way of bringing shamatha meditation as a way of stabilizing your mind, actually, as we discussed last night, have both the aspects of shamatha in insight meditation. So within these meditations on the relative bodhicitta, there are 2 types of meditations that are taught in this chapter. The first is the meditation on the equality of self and other. And the second is the meditation on the exchanging oneself for others. So we spoke about the equality or the sameness of self and other last night. And again, not in the abstract political way, but in terms of just that we're all equal. We're all the same in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. There's no difference. And because there is essentially no difference in that, we all have an equal an equal obligation to all sentient beings, as we do to all, because their wishes for happiness and suffering are no more important or less important than ours. So you have to develop that sense of equality of the self and other. And as I discussed last night, there's not like a specific meditation that's given here for saying, do this step and that step to come to the equality of self and other. These are given, the specific steps that we generally follow in practice are given in instructions on compassion practice, loving kindness practice, and so forth, that we have in many of our different meditations, in particular in things like the meditations on Tonglen meditation and so forth. With these meditations, then, So with the meditations, we have the 2 different types, the equality of self and other. And then the second part is exchanging oneself for other. And so there are a couple of interesting points here. The first thing to recognize is that the topic that we often keep coming back to in our Dharma teachings is the topic of, what is it? The 7 points of mind training, the Lojong teaching. And generally, when we teach the Lojong teachings, and also when we teach the chapter, we always say, well, the basis for the Lojong teachings is the way of the Bodhisattva, and in particular, this passage on exchanging ourselves for others in this chapter. This is the basis. Rinpoche, when he teaches this chapter, says this, other people say it. It's like, this is the basis for mind training. So how is it the basis for mind training? That's one important question that we have to consider. And another important question we have to consider is, what does it mean to say that we're exchanging ourselves for others? Because this sounds like kind of magical thinking. How does it work? So we'll go through. Maybe we should take the second question first. When you're talking about exchanging yourself for others, what do we mean by exchange? It's kind of like when you're talking about equality of self and other, we have our own ideas of what equality of self and other might mean. but it's not quite what we usually would think of the quality. And the same with exchanging oneself for other. Because normally when you talk about exchanging yourself for someone else, you talk about yourself saying, okay, I'll go over and take your place, you take my place, we're trading jobs, trading positions, I'll take the bad job, you take the good job. That's not quite what we mean. And it's not like this idea that you kind of imagine yourself to be some sort of an other sentient being. Imagine yourself, okay, I'm no longer this body and mind, I'm now some other sentient being. That's not exactly what we mean by exchanging yourself for another. Instead, what we mean is that there's actually a variety of different meditational techniques that we can follow that would, what do we say, that bring us to, bring us to decrease our cherishing of ourselves, the idea of thinking of ourselves as more important, and then increase our cherishing of others so that we actually consider others more important than ourselves, consider their needs as being more important than our own needs. So there are a variety of different techniques. And in fact, this chapter itself teaches several different techniques for exchanging yourself for other. There's meditating of exchanging yourself for someone you're lesser, and meditating on envy for your for your body and mind. Or imagining yourself as being your peer, your equal, and then meditating on rivalry or competitiveness for this body and mind. Or imagining yourself as a superior and then meditating on contempt and scorn for this measly body and mind. Or you can also kind of look at yourself as, instead of thinking of yourself as your ego clinging, you can sort of think about yourself as like the antidote, the meditation of the antidote for your ego clinging, and say, take your position as the antidote instead of the ego clinging, and sort of, castigate that part of yourself. It's another way that's taught here. So these are all different techniques that we'll be discussing today and tomorrow. There are quite a bit of them. It's actually the larger portion of this. So this is a very important thing. But so there are different techniques that we're doing. So, but what do we actually mean by saying that we're exchanging ourselves for others? So when we talk about exchanging ourselves for others, it's not like you are going to become some other being. It's not like you're going to meditate. You feel a lot of compassion for dairy cows, hard life, living on concrete. Their calves are taken away from them every year. It's difficult separation, losing their animal. You want to think, okay, I'm going to exchange myself for a dairy cow. Now I'm a dairy cow. Call me Bessie. I'm just going to say moo. Is that how it works? No, it doesn't work like that, because we can't physically do that. It's not like we can just take our body and mind and sort of say, switch. Okay, Bessie, you're going to take my place. You wouldn't want to be taught Dharma by a cow, right? A cow couldn't do it. I mean, if a cow could teach Dharma, I would be happy to take a Dharma lesson from a cow. If you ever meet a cow that teaches Dharma, please let me know. I'll go take a teaching, because it'll be pretty amazing. And the same way, I would never make a good cow. I can't give much milk. So that's not what we mean. It's not something that's not even possible to do. You can't just switch your 5 aggregates, because when we talk about a cow, the cow has the 5 aggregates of the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness of a cow. And I have the form, feeling, conception, consciousness of a human, of a particular human. You can't just trade one for the other. It's not possible. We can't do that. So then you might think to yourself, well, actually, it's just a question of actually, you have to kind of trade your, it's kind of like exchanging your 5 aggregates. So you want to trade your 5 aggregates for another sentient being. Well, are you going to trade the body aggregates, or the form aggregates, or the mind aggregates, the body or the mind? Which are you going to trade? You can't really do one or the other. It's not like if you want to, that's not going to work. So you can't just trade the aggregates. You might think, well, I'm not going to trade the aggregates. Maybe what I'm going to trade is what you protect. You're going to trade what you protect. Instead of protecting me, I'm going to protect Bessie or all other sentient beings. and then they can, and then I'm not going to protect this. And so you're sort of trading what you're trying to protect. But you still get this idea of the separation of the different animals, of self and other, but the different beings, yourself and your other. And so this is still actually kind of hard, because it's really hard, because how do you separate out that which you protect from what protects it? So and the question is, what is protecting what? I mean, what's being protected? Is it the body? It's hard to say, because sometimes you feel suffering, you want to protect yourself from bodily suffering, but sometimes you also want to protect yourself from mental suffering. So is it the idea of there being a me, that's ego clinging? Well, ego clinging is a conception, it's an idea, it's in our mind. And that, so how do you trade that my ego clinging for someone else's? You can't do it. It's not like you can trade, the thing that you protect with someone else, and then exchange yourself from others. That's not how it works. It'd be kind of like the example. I'm going to update the example, or I'm going to localize the example that comes from the commentary by Paul Trengwa. The example is, if you are trading, you want to trade a jar of honey for a jar of maple syrup. You have to trade the whole jar, right? You can't just keep the jar and trade the honey and the maple syrup. That doesn't work. What are you going to put? How are you going to mix? How are you going to get the maple syrup out of one and the honey, and how are you going to trade the two without also trading the jars? It doesn't work. Of course, you could be clever and use a third jar, but that's kind of high tech. But so you can't do that. So it's not like you can have some separate thing that is protected, something that you can't even figure out what it is that's protecting what. Where is the me that is protecting the bodies? Because if you look at it, it's this idea of me. So we cling to our bodies, our feelings, our ideas, that is our conceptions. We cling to all of our different mental factors, emotions, and so forth. And we cling to our consciousnesses. And sometimes we cling to them as being me. Like with your body, somebody say, this is me, I'm right here. You point at your body. But at other times you talk about, this is my body. So in actuality, you can't really find a self that is either the thing to be protected or the person or the being that does the protecting. How can you separate out these two? You can't even find anything. Well, what are you going to exchange? Okay, you can't exchange your physical. You can't really exchange all the four mental aggregates, because we all have discrete continuum of them, and you can't even find anything to identify as a single thing to exchange in either of them. So if you can't find it, so what good? What are we doing when we're exchanging? So actually what we're doing is, you understand that your fixation on yourself is a fixation on these 5 aggregates of our being that are constantly changing from one moment to the next, in the body that constantly changes. We spoke about this a little bit last night, speaking about the progression from going to being a baby, to being an adult, to being an old, to being dead, going on to the next lifetime, and so forth. We spoke about this a little bit last night. It's always changing. The physical body is changing. The mental aggregates are changing. At some points in your lifetime, you have you're at the beginning, you're not very smart. In the middle, you think you're smart. In the end, you're not smart. And then at the very end, you have trouble thinking of anything. So, the whole mind is changing all the time. And so we have these aggregates that we grasp at, say, either this is mine, this is my body, but the my body that I grasped at 10 years ago, what is it? Every single cell in your body is exchanged every 7 years, do they say? Something like that? Or is it 3 years at any rate? So the me from 7 years ago is, the physical thing is completely different. It's all changed. But because there's a similarity, it's like every moment looks enough like the next moment. There's a similarity, similarity from moment to moment, that you mistake it for being the same. And you see that, you say, okay, this is the Khenpo David from 7 years ago, 2015, when we started this teachings on the way of the Bodhisattva. Every year, every moment, there's a new, every moment, even every moment of this teaching. If there were not some new aggregates being formed in every moment, I would never be able to move. The fact that my body can move, but I can move my hand from here to there. The aggregates that are over here in this moment are completely different than the aggregates that are over there. That which is on your left side, my hand is on my left side, is different than what's on your right side. This is change, and this is because the aggregates are continually changing from instant to instant, so quick, like nanosecond instants. We grasp at this as being a me. So what we can change is what we are grasping at as being me. And so you have these different meditations on grasping, trading your aggregates for the aggregates of someone else, which means instead of grasping at these aggregates as being me, you're grasping at another being's or all other beings' aggregates as being me. That's one way to do this. And these are the 3 meditations on the exchanging yourself for the inferior, the equal, and the superior. And so you basically do that. Or you can use other techniques that, what do we say? Use other techniques that increase your, that decrease your attachment to yourself, and that actually where you're cherishing others more than yourself. So for example, when we take the example of the Tonglen meditation, giving and taking. Giving and taking is actually literal, but it sounds a little different in English, but this literally works. You're giving away all of your happiness to others. And you're taking on others' suffering. You are not actually at that point changing your locus of ego clinging. You're still thinking of, in the Tonglen practice, you're still thinking of the me or mine as being the 5 aggregates that you normally would cling to as yourself. But what you're doing instead is you're actually, instead of thinking that those are the most important thing, you're thinking that others are more important. So this is changing the focus of what is there, because what we're actually trying to do in exchanging self for other is overcome the habits of cherishing yourself more than others, cherishing yourself and those around you. So for example, I was just glancing through something online this morning, and like there was an article from a bioethicist talking about, and I didn't have time to read the whole article, but a bioethicist was talking about, well, why should we have a species-centric idea of humans as being more important than other animals? And this is a Western, so I read the first paragraph, it's clear they're talking about the Western. So like someone had a pig transplant. So why is it ethical to kill a pig, but not to transplant a heart, but not to kill a human to transplant a heart? Why? It's because we had the species section. So we think humans are more important. Within humans, we think that our nations are more important, or are the people who look like us. And I think this happens among anything that you would project as being an ethnic group or a race. You see the people who look like us, and we feel more affinity for them. An example of this is in 2015, you had Syrian refugees fleeing the war in Syria who were heading for Europe, hoping for safety and having horrendous times trying to get across borders. In 2022, you have Ukrainians waltzing across the borders into Poland and Hungary and Moldova. Why? Well, it's because the Ukrainians look like Europeans. You can call this whatever you want to call it. This is basically, when we think of me and mine, we include people who look like us more than people who don't. And within that, we include the people who we divide ourselves up into smaller and smaller tribes. So, we get the red and the blue. Red state, blue state, even within a blue state, what are you? What tribe are you part of? And we make these, and then we care more about the people in our own tribe than we do about others. And so this all comes from the habit of cherishing me and mine, me and my group more than we cherish other groups. So why don't we feel equal responsibility, equal care, equal love, equal compassion for the people who come from a different group? It comes down to this very basic thing. Very basic clinging to me as being more important, treasuring me more than we treasure others. And so this is when you talk about it in this way, it sounds like, okay, we're going to start talking about some sort of social justice thing. And probably the social justice aspects do come out of this, I'm sure. But really what it comes down to is that this is like the basis for all of our suffering. It's a clinging to me, because we have this mistaken idea of me and mine as being more important, and therefore we can do whatever we want to make me or mine be better off. And in order to make that happen, we then engage in activities that are and actions that are motivated by greed, hatred, delusion, and then all the secondary afflictions that arise from those. So that harms others. And in the long run, it creates more suffering for ourselves. So regardless of the social aspects, it's something that we have to do even for just personal aspects. If you really care about me and mine, then you actually have to stop cherishing me and mine. Then you can actually do something to help me and mine. And by the way, also everyone else, because everyone else is not different. So this is the basis of mind training. So really to begin doing it, when you talk about doing the 7 points of mind training or any of the mind training texts, it comes down to overcoming your ego clinging. Now, there are lots of different ways that we can meditate on overcoming ego clinging. We can meditate on the selflessness of the individual. We can meditate on emptiness. We can do all sorts of things. We can meditate on the nature of the mind and so forth. You might think, why do I need to bother with something like Tonglen meditation? It's kind of lesser because it's not meditating on emptiness, or the meditating on selflessness. What we really need to realize is the ultimate nature of how things are. That's what we actually need to know. We have to understand how things really are, because if we really know the nature of things, then we're going to be able to, liberate ourselves and others, we might think. Why do we want to waste our times? Because, when you're meditating on Tonglen, you're working with ego clinging, and that's, ego clinging is what we need to overcome. But this is when you meditate on just selflessness on its own, or emptiness on its own, particularly, and when you're doing emptiness on its own, there's a really great danger that it's just going to be a conceptual meditation and not actually get to be a real deep understanding. When you get to meditating on these alone, they can't themselves really bring much power, because it's just nothing for them to work with. The examples, like the famous example that Rinpoche always, that all the Tibetan teachers talk about, the one that was given by Dharmakirti of Sumatra, the Golden Isle, Serling, he's called in Tibetan. His actual name was Dharmakirti, one of many Dharmakirtis. He taught that if you put a seed on a dry rock, it's not going to plant, it's not going to grow, because there's no moisture, there's nothing for it to grow in. You have to you need to put it in a place where you've got a lot of manure. You've got to take you've got to collect all the manure from the village. People make a lot of manure and put it on the fields. And if you put it on there, on the fields, and you take all the cow and the chicken manure and everything, put it all in the fields, you're gonna have really fertile soil. Then you're gonna grow nice flowers and nice crops. You just put the seeds on the rock, you aren't gonna get anything. It's the same way with the meditations on bodhicitta, on the meditations on exchanging oneself for other, meditating on relative bodhicitta. As you do this, they grow well in the soil of the filthy soil of ego clinging. You use the ego clinging, but by using the different techniques of cherishing yourself more than others, by changing your focus of your ego clinging, then you begin to kind of just automatically loosen the grip of this ego clinging that has us. And then that breaks it down so that you can actually more easily realize the lack of a self, the lack of a true individual self. You can realize emptiness and so forth without even going through any of the head-banging logics, if you're really doing it, right? So it's a very good way to actually come to a realization of the true nature without going through all of the philosophical examinations and so forth. Now, of course, the philosophical examinations are important. And they're also helpful and complementary to this, but some people just don't do them, don't get into that. And if you don't, it doesn't mean that you can't understand emptiness or you can't realize the the meaning of selflessness. It just means that you use a different method, and this method is exchanging yourself for others. Or in the tradition of our current tradition, we generally focus on the teachings of mind training. And so the teachings of mind training are basically these instructions on exchanging oneself for others, but they also come up from in other areas in the way of the Bodhisattva. For example, if we go to, if you take a look at the meditation on this, the passage in the third chapter from the dedications that Shantideva made before taking the Bodhisattva vow. And this is on chapter 3. It starts on page 20 of the book. And the passage, and some of you, I think some of you might not have books. I don't know if you can position some of the computers that are showing the screenshots can also be positioned in a way that people who don't have the books can see. Is that possible? Can you all kind of see, or no, not really? Susie, you don't have your computer open now? Okay, that's okay. If you can, yeah, kind of. At any rate, if you're looking at the chapter 3, starting from verse 7, it says, may the virtue I have amassed by doing all of this eliminate all the suffering of every sentient being. As long as sentient beings are ill, until their ailments are cured, may I be their medicine, their doctor, and their nurse as well. So can we do everything we can for other sentient beings to help them all become help? Whatever we can do, can we be anything? May showers of food and drink relieve the torments of hunger and thirst. In intermediate eons of famine, may I become food and drink. So may I myself become that which nourishes our other sentient beings. May I be an inexhaustible treasure for poor and deprived beings and stay nearby them as the various things they need and want. To benefit all sentient beings, I give without hesitation my body, my belongings, and all virtues of the 3 times, giving everything away. In other words, instead of thinking of me as being more important, thinking of others. And the reason is, as he says in the next verse, nirvana is relinquishing everything. My wish is to gain nirvana. At some point, all must be relinquished. We have to let go of everything. At some point, we're going to die. It's best to give it to beings. As I have given living beings this body for their pleasure, so I've given the body away. May they always do with it as they like. Let them kill, revile, or beat it. So no matter what else someone else does to you physically, it's okay, because you've given your body to them, or Shantideva has given his body to them, so he's fine with it. They may make my body a cause for sport or jest or snickering, but I have given them my body. Why bother holding it dear? So it's like, why should I cherish it? I'm devoting my body to the benefit of all other sentient beings. So it's given it to them. So let them use it however they like. So let them do whatever acts will not bring them any harm. May thinking of me never be meaningless for any. When someone thinks of me and has a thought of anger or faith, may that be the cause of what fulfills their every benefit. May anyone who slanders me or any others who cause harm, and all who criticize me have the fortune to awaken. May I be a guardian of the defenseless, leader of travelers, a boat or ship, or even a bridge for those who wish to cross. The land for those who seek the land, a bed for those without. For all those beings who want a servant, may I become their slave. So you're willing to take even the worst of positions for the benefit of all sentient beings. May I be a wish-fulfilling jewel, fine vase, accomplished mantra, great medicine, a heaven tree, and bountiful cow for beings. Like earth and the other elements, like space, may I always be the ground supporting in many ways the lives of sentient beings. Likewise, in all ways for all beings, out to the edges of space, may I be till all pass to nirvana what gives them sustenance. So this is the aspiration that Shantideva made in the 3rd chapter, right? Right before it's the last of the 7 branches, right before he takes the Bodhisattva vow. So even there, that really encapsulates the essence of mind training. Take this body and mind and devote it entirely to the benefit of other sentient beings, so that they will so that they will become happy. Doing so actually leads to the greatest happiness for ourselves. But that's not what you're primarily thinking. Shantideva is not saying here, and therefore I'm going to become a beauty and I'll become a Buddha and I'll have it made. No, he's saying other sentient beings, putting other sentient beings first. And so this is why we always have to do the mind training. But there's a little bit of a danger in mind training in our, and that's that actually we can become a little bit, not use it actually as an antidote for our own ego clinging. And in particular, when we look at how mind training is presented in the West, there's a special danger for that. Because in the West, especially when presenting things in a popular way, people don't want to talk about, oh, we can't go there, no, can't talk about karma, we can't talk about past and future lives. I talk about it all the time. That's probably why, I'm probably never going to become well-known or well-liked teacher, because I'm just going to say, but you've got to, so in the West, when we talk about mind training, well, what are the benefits of mind training? You become a more compassionate person. You have a happier life. You can enjoy your toast better in the morning because you're more mindful. You will have less stress in your job. You, and the person reading about it is thinking, me, me, me. It's got beneficial for me, benefits for me, me, me. I'm going to feel more compassion, me. So is that really training the mind? It's actually working the opposite. So you have to be careful when you're actually doing the mind training that you're actually exchanging yourself for others. In order to do that, you first have to really begin by, you have to go through the steps of, we talked about in the beginning of this chapter, getting the solitude of body or mind to whatever degree, even if you can't go on retreat, going through the teachings on decreasing your attachment to the people and places around you, to the things, to the nice French pastries. So there might be nice pastries, but really, why are we attached to them? Of course, if you offer them to me, I'm not going to turn them down, and I haven't turned them down, but what are we attached to? Why are we attached to? Why are we doing mind training? So when you do mind training practice, what are you attached to? So you really have to, when you begin the mind training, the first point of the 7 points of mind training is first train in the preliminaries. And when we teach it, because, we've got a limited amount of time to go through the 7 points of mind training, we've got a weekend. Okay, so sometimes you get a little bit more about the preliminaries. Sometimes you get a little bit less. It's kind of like you understand them. But if you do not take the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to heart, your mind training practice will not ever actually be mind training, or not reach its full potential for mind training. It won't actually do it. It can't. So you have to really meditate on them. There is a mind training text by the 8th Karmapa Mithya Dorje. And it follows more or less the same structure as, similar structure as the main meditation parts of the 7 points of mind training by Chakali Dorje. It's clearly based on many old Kadampa manuscripts. When you look at it, I'd love to translate it, but it's got all this 12th, 13th, 15th century local dialect in Tibetan. So there are just, you're reading along and everything's making great sense. And then there's this word that's like, well, that's not in any dictionary, and it's really hard to figure out. You have a basic idea of what he's saying, but so it's hard. I'd love to translate, but it's a difficult one to translate. At any rate, the way this text is divided up, it's got a set of, it's divided into 60 different meditations, although if you really do it, some of the meditations say, now do these 5 steps, but make this change to it. So it's actually more like, 70 different meditations. You're supposed to do each of them until you really get it. And then move on to the next. The first 8 of them are guru yogas. Why is that? It's because if we think we know what's going on, you're never going to get anywhere. The first thing you have to realize is that we don't know. If we knew what was going on, we'd be Buddhas already, but we don't know. We need to really accept that there are people who know the way, who have gone down the path, and who can show it to us. These are the gurus, Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and then their representatives, the people who are passing on their teachings, the gurus. That's why we have to do it. It's not for any other reason. It's because they can give us the teachings that can actually help us, that we don't know, or that we think we know, but really don't. So you have to develop that. And if you don't take that point of really saying, okay, I give up. I don't know what's going on. You tell me. When you really get to that point where you've completely surrendered, then you're able to do Dharma practice. If you're not actually at that point, you're not going to get very far. Then there are, is it 3 or 4 meditations on the precious human body? 10 meditations on impermanence, another 3 or 4 on karmic cause and effect, and another few on the defects of samsara. All in all, before you get to the main practice, there are 30 different meditations. So if you were to go through and spend a day or 3 days or a week on each of these different meditations, you would be spending over half of your retreat only on the preliminaries. Then it gets to the meditations on ultimate bodhicitta and then relative bodhicitta, and basically following what goes through ultimate bodhicitta. Then before it gets to the practice of Tonglen, there are 3 or 4 meditations on developing compassion, 3 or 4 meditations developing loving kindness. And then you get to Tonglen. So by the time you actually get to the Tonglen meditation, and the first of the Tonglen instructions is the one that we always translate as begin the sequence of taking and receiving with yourself. The actual Tibetan in the 7 points of mind training says, Lempe Goram Daletsan. Begin the process of taking with yourself. So normally when we talk about the mind training instructions, you talk about this instruction as being one where you have to be, appreciate yourself and feel kind for yourself and so forth. And appreciate that, not beat up on yourself. And this is all very true and very good. It's an important step that we have to go through, especially coming from our particular culture. We have a lot of feelings of guilt and so forth. We do need to take care of that. But then we also need to go through all of the steps of the preliminaries. And so by the time you get to this, after you've gone through all the preliminaries, it's like this life, when you're worried about me and guilt and so forth, you're worried about me in this lifetime. If you've gone through the preliminaries, then you're not worried about this lifetime at all. If you've really taken them to heart. So then the process of taking, begin the sequence of taking for yourself. It's like, what is the self that you want to take from? You want to take from your future self. This is also very clear in Jamgon Khodro Lodro Thay's commentary on the 7 points of mind training. He says that when you are doing this practice, you imagine doing Tonglen for your future self. Now, your future self could be 5 minutes in the future. It could be 10 years in the future. It could be a next lifetime or all of your next lifetimes. So what does that mean? What this means is that we have all sorts of karma that we've accumulated over beginningless time. And it's going to ripen on us. With the karma, there are 2 different types of karma that can ripen. We divide it into 4, but basically you've got karma that's definitely going to ripen and karma that is not definitely going to ripen. The karma that's not definitely going to ripen in the right conditions, if you do the right conditions, it's not going to ripen on you because it doesn't have what it needs. But the karma that's definitely going to ripen, unless it's purified by something like Vajra for confessions and so forth, is going to ripen on you. And even if you do your confession practices, if your confession practices are not really strong enough, if you aren't really using the 4 powers, then it's still going to ripen on you, but it might be less, it might decrease it. So you have to think about it. In the future, you have no idea which karma is going to ripen in our next birth, what we're going to be reborn. So we have, frankly, over an infinite series of previous lifetimes, we've done a whole lot more bad karma than good karma. And so the chances of being reborn in any good situation is very difficult, very small. But right now we are born in a position where we can do it. So where we can handle it, where we've got a connection to the Dharma, we've got the precious human body. And so the meditation, according to Mikya Dorje, and this is kind of an extreme version, is actually to imagine that you are taking all of the suffering of the future and ripening on yourself. You imagine taking it all on yourself. And then when something bad happens to you, because something bad will happen to you in this lifetime, when it happens to you, then instead of being upset, oh no, my world is falling apart, it's like, my karma is ripening on me, my prayer is coming true. And it's just so like, wow, this is so exciting. And then instead of a difficulty and a problem being a difficulty and a problem, it's an opportunity, changing the way you think about it. So that instead of, you've got incurable bone cancer, it's like, excellent. My prayers are coming true. If we can get there, then no matter what happens to you. Now, of course, you have to meditate. This is different, just a different way of thinking about it. You can think about this in your daily practice, but before you do, practice 4 reminders to really internalize them. Practice those. If you internalize them, then this meditation is beneficial. If you haven't internalized them, then it might just make you crazy. So take your time. Go through them, but really emphasize those. And so it's important to do that. Then when you're doing Tonglen for other people, you actually have to think about who you're doing the Tonglen for. Because what do we think about it? Oh, my friend got incurable bone cancer. I better do Tonglen for them. I heard about this person, my friend of a friend, someone I know. So we often, when you think about doing Tonglen meditation, someone who is already part of me and who's either me or my group, has got some sort of terrible situation, we feel compassion for that person who's close to us. And we do Tonglen for them. And we're only doing it for when they have some sort of crisis, some sort of a problem, some sort of physical suffering. But actually, when we're doing it, if you're taking all the suffering of all sentient beings, if you really look at what is suffering, you've got the suffering of suffering, you've got the suffering of change, and you've got the pervasive suffering of formation. So in other words, all of our 5 aggregates that are the results of karma are suffering. So when you're doing the Tonglen for other sentient beings, instead of just doing it for a few, you start with beings who are close to you because it's easier. And then you move out to doing it for successively other people. Instead of only taking the suffering of suffering, you take all of the suffering. So you breathe in, and as you breathe in, all of the suffering and all the causes of suffering. Well, if you breathe in all of the suffering, which is the resultant 5 aggregates, and then you breathe in all of the causes of suffering, that's the karma and afflictions, which are the 5 aggregates that are negative or have a bad. Basically, what you're doing is you're breathing in all of the 5 defiled aggregates. Basically, everything we think of as me and mine, or the other beings. And so you imagine as you breathe in that you're taking all of that. So as you breathe in the smoke, then the black smoke that comes from all the other sentient beings, that also takes all of their 5 aggregates that are suffering, and all their 5 aggregates that are the causes of suffering. And the only thing it leaves them with is the truth of the path and the truth of cessation, the undefiled. So you imagine that you take it in. And so as you take it in, everything that comes in, everything that would be recognizable as them, you breathe it in. And then you're kind of just left in this like sphere of light in front of you. It's the Dharmakaya. Then as you breathe out all of your everything good, everything beautiful. And you breathe it out to all sentient beings, it strikes them. It's like an arrow striking a target. It strikes all these sentient beings. And then what happens? Well, then they have all of your merit. Because they have merit, what is the result of merit? The result of the merit is all the qualities of Buddhahood, the form bodies, the Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya. So you imagine that as you're doing it, you're not just relieving someone of temporary suffering, you're actually imagining that you're transforming them into Buddhas with all 3 of the kayas of the Buddha. So if you do Tonglen in this way, then it's a deeper way of doing the practice. But again, you have to start with the preliminaries. You really have to take them to heart, because if you don't, then it's not going to really have any meaning. So this is an important part of mind training. And I know that you all have had a lot of teachings on mind training over the years. You've had the program with Lama Kathy last winter that many of you also participated in. So I just wanted to share this just to kind of say, hey, well, mind training is actually much, much faster than we normally think when you really take a look at it. And so it's very good to to look at it. But the most important thing about mind training is if you are doing mind training with the idea that is going to make you feel better in this lifetime, you got to think. You got to take a step back and look, because that's not the point. It is a benefit. As I said a couple times in the last few days, the less you care for yourself now in this lifetime, the happier you're going to be. The less you worry about me and mine now, the better off you're going to be. So, well, we got to get to this chapter. And of course, when you start to this chapter, so let's go back to the chapter, and we're going to resume on with verse 111 on page 97. That's where we left off last night. Just as, due to habituation, I know the drops of blood and semen that came from others as myself, though that has no reality. Why don't I similarly grasp the bodies of other beings as me? It also is not difficult to see my body as someone else. So here, Shantideva is speaking about the basic idea of exchanging ourselves and others. In other words, instead of grasping this body, this mind, as being the five aggregates of this body and mind as being me, to think of other people as being me, than to think of this body and mind as other. Now, the first stanza here actually refers to the Buddhist ideas of how we are conceived as humans, how we're born, what is the sequence of birth. And given the recent events, I have to preface by saying that I have absolutely nothing political to say here. Okay, we're just going to talk about it. I'm just going to talk about it as it's presented in the traditional teachings. This has nothing to do with current events. This was written long before our current problems started. So when we talk about this, we have to understand how is it that we are born, because that's what Shantideva is talking about. So generally, the way that the human beings, but all beings, take birth is that because of grasping. So you die, the person dies in one lifetime, and then the consciousnesses and the fine mental body travel through the body for some period of time, an average of 49 days. And then at some point, at the end of that period of time, the bardo being perceives, if they're going to be reborn from the womb or born from an egg, they perceive their parents copulating. So we're going to take human beings, because we're currently human, we'll take human beings as an example. So if you're going to be, if you have the karma to be reborn as a human, then you will wander through the bardo until you come to the point where you see your parents copulating, your future parents copulating. And then at that point, at that point, now the ancients didn't have any microscopes, so they couldn't really look at things in detail. So they thought that it was the blood in the mother's womb. That's what they thought was the source of that came from the female, and then they thought it was the liquid from the semen from the father, and they didn't have any way of seeing either the ovum or the sperm. So right now, in terms of it doesn't make any difference in terms of the actual process. The text, it says blood and semen. Actually, if we take a look at it in the scientific presentation, we know that it's actually the ovum and the sperm. So the ovum, when the ovum and the sperm come together, then the bardo being then clings to that, enters the womb, and clings to that as being me. So there's this thought, me, this is me. That clinging to that particular ovum and that particular sperm. Now the ovum came from the mother, and the bardo being had no conception of that as being me until it clung to it. It clung to it. The sperm came from the father, and you had no idea of it being me until they all come together. So you've got these three things that come together: the sperm, ovum, and the consciousness. And the consciousness grasps these as being me, and then falls into a faint, and then gradually recovers consciousness over the process of gestation of the womb. As the faculties and so forth develop in that new body, the coarse physical faculties. So that's the basic Buddhist presentation. So the point here is that the only thing that makes that me is that the consciousness at that point grasps it as being, has that ego clinging. It's kind of like when you have a new car, you go to the Tesla. Yes, you go to the Tesla store. You think, wow, there's a Model S. And it actually has you ordered it 6 months ago or a year ago, or however long it takes you have to wait to get it. And then finally, you sign the paper. They give you, I don't even think they have keys for Teslas. I think they have some sort of like a card. I don't know what they have. I don't remember. But they give you whatever thingy that actually gives you control over the car. And then you think, mine. It's that moment that you think, mine. Or probably more likely for most of us, you go to the used car dealership and they've got something with, it's only got 60,000 miles. Yeah, some little old lady drove it around for a few years. It's 10 years old, but it's only got 60,000 miles in it. Yeah, it sounds good. I'm going to take it. So before that, it wasn't yours. It was that little old lady's car that now the used car dealer got. Now it's yours. And then the next day when the engine burns out because he actually was lying to you and you turned them back the odometer, then you're upset. If the engine had burned out before you actually took the car, you wouldn't have had any. That's right. So only at the point that you say, mine, only then do you care for it. So similarly, when we are taking birth, at that moment that we grasp the aggregates of being mine, the only thing that makes it mine is that we think this is mine. And then after that, because of the clinging to it, your mind stays connected to the physical aggregates as they develop in the womb and throughout your life. This is why Shantideva is saying in the text. So you know the drops of blood and semen that came from others as myself, that has no reality. There's nothing real there that makes them me. The only thing is it's mine. So why don't I similarly grasp the bodies of other beings as me? In other words, why don't I cherish other beings like I cherish me? Why don't I cling to them the way I cling to me? And it's also not difficult to see my body as being someone else and realize that this really, the only thing that makes this me is my clinging to it. So you're just kind of shifting the locus of your ego clinging. It doesn't mean that you're going to change the actual perceptions or anything that you have. That continuum of perceptions is still going. We have the perceptions every moment that we're here. We have a different perception of ourselves, right? Of ourselves in our environment. That perception, if you're just seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling the physical sensations, that and also mental sensations, you're feeling them, those perceptions are not conceptual. So they're not grasping at me or mine. It's only you've got that conception of ego clinging. And it's a particular mental factor, the mental factor of conception, the aggregate of conception, it's clinging, labeling them as mine or me. So that's what we're changing. We're working with that. What are we clinging to that? And if you exchange it, and the more you exchange it, and the more you can loosen up its grip at this particular set of aggregates, then you can begin to see through its tricks. Knowing that I have faults while others are oceans of good qualities, I'll meditate on giving up self-clinging while adopting others. So often when we think of me and mine, usually what we do is we do our best to ignore, hide our faults, even hiding them from ourselves. Often we aren't even we're only kind of semi-consciously aware of them and we don't want to think about them. We certainly don't want anyone else to know about them. But when we look at other people, the only thing we ever really see, the first thing you ever see about anyone else is their faults. We were speaking about this on the drive over there. There was a guy who was in a pickup truck holding a cigarette outside the driver's side window. Like immediately, what do you think about that other person? Right? You have your own ideas. If you see someone, first of all, you see them in a pickup truck. Then you see them with that cigarette hanging out the driver's side window. Then you got this idea, okay, that's that type of person. You have no idea. Absolutely no idea, really. Some lefty. I don't know, whatever they are. But we look at people and we see the faults. And those faults that we see in other people are our own projections. So instead, you try to look at other beings and see their qualities. So giving up your self-clinging while adopting others. In other words, thinking about others as clinging to change the locus of our ego, clinging from me to other sentient beings. And in this way, we meditate on exchanging ourselves for others. So I've been going on quite a bit this morning and only covered 3 verses, but I think that there's been a lot that I've spoken about. There might be some questions about it, and I also don't want to overload you for the moment, leave you some time to think about things over our lunch break. So maybe if anyone has any questions, we can have some time for a couple of questions, either about last night's material or today's. And then we can, we'll get back together at 2 p.m. To continue with the teaching today. So if anyone has any question, either live or on Memorex, is it live or Memorex or the Zoom, which is it? Okay, it looks like Donna has a question. So I'm going to mute my
can you hear me? Okay. This is slightly off topic, possibly, but in terms of the consciousness attaching through ego clinging to the ovum and sperm, does sort of deep renunciation in terms of celibacy at all play any role in the consciousness's draw to that situation to begin with?
The question is, when we have this process of the consciousness, the Bardo consciousness, the Bardo being then clinging to the ovum and sperm as being me, and does the process of like renunciation and celibacy and so forth, does that play any role in this? Does this have any effect in it? So in terms of this lifetime, for example, if in this lifetime you develop renunciation and start practicing celibacy, either the celibate lay vows or monastic vows, that's already happened. So it's past for this lifetime. Now, how does it affect future lifetimes? Our rebirth in future lifetimes depends upon our lust. It's out of lust, the mind mistaken goes to the next place of birth, as it says in the Treasury of Abhidharma. It's out of lust. So you have some sort of lust for something. Lust for the mother, lust for the father, lust for warmth, lust for cold, lust for food or anything, and that takes you to your place of birth. So the question of human birth, and it's lust for the parents, and in particular either more the father or the mother, one or the other, and that's going to kind of determine your sex. So as long as you have lust, you're going to take birth out of karma. So if you are someone who has strong habits of celibacy in previous lifetimes, but you haven't seen selflessness and you haven't overcome all the attachments and lust and greed in your being, then you're still going to take rebirth out of that lust and greed, but it might be less. And then because of that, because of past aspirations and so forth, then you'll be more likely to practice celibacy or so forth in that next lifetime. It will come more naturally to you, but there's still some there. Another way that it works, though, is when, for example, when bodhisattvas take birth out of compassion, they do not feel any particular lust for the father or the mother. But because of their compassion for beings, they look and see, is this someone who will, is this the right position for me to be able to help sentient beings? Am I being reborn in good parents who can give me good parents, not necessarily being parents in a good family, but parents who can put me in a good position. For example, the third Karl Varangian Dorjes, his parents were paupers, but they were at the right place, the right time for him to be reborn there and then to meet his teacher. So he consciously took birth with them. This way with other people. So good parents doesn't necessarily mean good in the way we think about it. Parents who can give us a good opportunity to practice the Dharma or to benefit other sentient beings. And so this is what takes them. So for the bodhisattvas, it's not the lust, it is their aspirations, their aspiration to benefit all sentient beings. So what we do ourselves in this lifetime, so we want to also be reborn in a good position in our future lifetime. So what we have to do two things. You have to make the aspirations and you have to work to overcome your ego clinging that would cause you to mistakenly take a bad rebirth. So I hope that answers your question. Good. All right, any other questions? Yes, Jan.
Just to follow up on that. So would it be correct to say that we, or our set of aggregates comes into existence with a kind of karmic encoding that predisposes us? I mean, in other words, we're still working with that.
Yeah.
So, but we have a predisposition due to past actions.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
You think that way?
Okay. Did all of you online hear the question? No. Some are nodding, some are not. So I'll repeat it anyways. The basic question is, so does this mean that we're kind of born with a karmic encoding when the 5 aggregates of this life start? Is there some sort of karmic encoding that starts on how does this work? Basically what you're saying. So in other words, the real nature of the question is like, how do the karmic dispositions, the karmic propensities get carried from the past into the future, from previous lifetime into the next? So we talk about this in terms of the consciousnesses, and I could talk about it in terms of the 6 consciousness. In terms of Shantideva, to be taught about in terms of the 6 consciousnesses. In terms of the way Trungpa Rinpoche usually teaches, he teaches about the 8 consciousnesses. So the 8th consciousness, if you talk about it in terms of the 6 consciousness, then the 8th consciousness is just an aspect of the 6. It's a subtle continuum of mind. You're not really aware of it, but it's momentary. It's not like a static thing that keeps going over a long period of time. It's actually momentary. So it also is arising and perishing in every moment, rising and perishing in every moment. But it's not a single thing that is rising and perishing over time. It's like a whole collection of mental propensities, what we call imprints or karmic seeds. The imprints of the actions and the thoughts and so forth and impressions that you've had in the past, and the karmic seeds. These imprints and the seeds are kind of different words for the same thing. You can sort of think of it as like the flow of a river, and it's like how the disturbance of the flow of the river then affects the current below that disturbance. So you have a disturbance here, like if you put a boulder in the middle of a river, then it's going to affect the way the water flows downstream, right? So similarly, when you do something karmically that makes a big imprint, then that affects the kind of flow of the karma from one moment to the next, from one moment to the next. And there's this momentary, it's rising and perishing in every moment. So all these imprints are rising and perishing in every moment, and that's how it goes. So when you come to the point of your death, and the 4 aggregates of mind separate from the coarse physical aggregates, then and go on to the next, that continuum of those seeds and imprints keeps going. And then one of those seeds, because of causes and conditions, will ripen. And it's brought up by your ego clinging and so forth, and that it ripens as the appearance of your parents, and then you cling to the sperm and so forth. And that is how it goes from moment to moment. There's not a single thing that is traveling over time. It's a collection of things, of imprints in your consciousness that are arising and perishing in every moment. They're multiple. In any given moment, they're multiple, and there's a sequence and a series of them. So you can't really say there's any one thing that it all is, but there's this continuum of them that is in our mind that goes from moment to moment. So we have in our minds, it's important to remember with our minds that our consciousnesses are not just a single thing. There's not a single thing that you say, this is me, this is my mind, this is my consciousness. At any different moment, you've got different types of awareness. And each of those different types of awareness has a bunch of different qualities that we call mental factors. So even if you have a visual consciousness, you have a whole bunch of different reds and yellows and shapes. And I'm sitting in shrine room, so I'm saying reds and yellows and wood colors and so forth, right? And blues and so forth, all these different colors. Those are all different appearances. You hear sounds, and you can hear many different sounds. The sounds of traffic, the sounds of voices and so forth are all different consciousnesses. We think of them as being one, but actually there are all sorts of different consciousnesses flowing along in a continuum that we grasp at as being me, as being mine, right? And so that just goes from moment to moment, and that's how the karmic propensities get carried over from moment to moment. Any other questions? Daniel? Oh, Daniel and then Amy. Okay.
So not quite getting how the exchanging of the self and other, grasping at others is more important, would lead to realization. I can see how, like, if it reduces ego clinging, you know, then we're getting closer to emptiness. Could you just speak more about that?
Mm-hmm. So the question for those of you listening online who didn't hear is, how is it that meditating on exchanging self for others brings us close to actually realizing the true nature of things, as opposed to just merely decreasing ego clinging? Well, the main thing that is preventing us from seeing the actual nature of things is ego clinging. And so anything you can do to reduce ego clinging makes it easier to actually realize the ultimate nature. That's the basic point. So, and as you decrease the ego clinging, if it's ego clinging that is preventing you from seeing it, then once the ego clinging is gone, then the obscuration is removed. The other thing is that it also really helps us see the interdependence of all phenomena. And as you see the interdependence of all phenomena, then that interdependence is just essentially another word for emptiness. It's looking at the changing nature of relative appearances as opposed to the empty ultimate nature. But these two are not separate. And so in this way, it brings us much closer to that. So I think that this will come up a little bit more. I think it also comes up more clearly as you actually do it. It brings us to that. But basically, when we talk about the ultimate nature, you can't understand the ultimate nature independent of relative appearances. And if you're focused on relative appearances as being solid, single, me, autonomous, then you aren't ever going to see the ultimate nature. So the more you can destroy that, then the easier. This is something that Galen Karma has occasionally told a story or given an example. We are imprisoned in the jail of ego clinging, and we are the ones who put ourselves there. The only way you can get out of this jail, there's no doors on the jail. The only way you can get out of it is by busting down the bars of the jail with a hammer. And the hammer that we use to bust down the bars of jail is compassion. So you use your compassion to bust down the jail of ego clinging and to be able to realize the ultimate nature. All right, so Amy had a question. So I'm going to mute and then I'll turn up my volume. So just wait a moment before I'll give you a sign when I'm ready to hear you.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the super juicy teachings. They're really, really helpful and great. And secondly, I would like to ask you to please translate the Mikyo Dorje text if you could get the chance. It sounds fantastic. And someone can help you with the vocab. I don't know who that is, but I believe it will happen. So please do that if you can. And my question is actually following on the other two questions about the consciousnesses, the eighth consciousness in particular. I've been studying Dzogchen with Mingyur Rinpoche, and in the Dzogchen tradition, you have to distinguish between mind and Rigpa, between Sem and Rigpa. And when he was teaching on this, he said that the eight consciousnesses are momentary, as you just described, and also that each of them has an object, whereas awareness doesn't need to have an object. I couldn't figure out what the object is for the eighth consciousness. The other seven, it makes sense to me, but I know it's not your necessarily. I'm like coming at you with this other teacher's presentation out of nowhere. So, but I just wondered if you had any reaction to that. Like, what would be the object for the eighth consciousness? Because I never thought of it as momentary, and the way you described it is really helpful. And that made me wonder, like, oh, it reminded me that I couldn't figure out what would be the object that the eighth consciousness would grasp at.
So the question, first, my comment that my teachings are juicy. I'm not sure what that means. What is a juicy teaching? Kind of like a juicy steak, I don't know. And then a request that I translate the Mikyo Dorje text. I would dearly love to do it. And I do know someone who I could probably prevail upon to help me with some of that vocabulary. And then the actual question, though, is with the eighth consciousness, when we talk about the eighth consciousness as being momentary, Mingyur Rinpoche gave some teachings on the eighth consciousness where he described it as having an object. So what is the object of the eighth consciousness, basically? This is an interesting question. It's actually, the answer comes from the 30 verses by Vasubandhu. Now, of course, there are many different all right, there are many different presentations. And so the one that is kind of the basis of all of them comes from the 30 verses by Vasubandhu, which His Holiness started teaching upon last year. Now, he didn't actually get to speaking about this verse. Let me just share that with you. Here it is. So there are three. Okay, so here it is at the top of the page. Of them, the consciousness called ground with all the seeds is ripening. It is unrecognized awareness of grasping in place and is always associated with contact, attention, feeling, conception of volition. So this is telling you what it is. It's called the ground consciousness. And it is unrecognized awareness of grasping and of place. And so it is the object of it is the grasping, and also the place, if I remember properly, is the place of the realm of the six realms of existence. In other words, the six realms of existence in Vasubandhu's presentation are not separate from from the eighth conscious. You have this grasping at this at the appearances of the human realm, for example, as human. That grasping at those is the object of the eighth consciousness.
Could you read that again slowly, please, for those of us who can't see it?
Oh, yes. So of them, the consciousness called ground, that is the eighth consciousness, with all the seeds, with all the karmic seeds, is ripening. It's also called the ripening consciousness. It is unrecognized awareness of grasping in place, and is always associated with contact, attention, feeling, conception, and volition. So unrecognized awareness of grasping in place. So grasping means like you are aware that you're grasping, but you don't recognize it because you're looking not at the awareness, you're looking at what you're grasping. And place refers to where you are in the sixth. So it's unrecognized awareness of grasping in place. This is what Vasubandhu says in the 30 verses. So it's a very basic level of subtle grasping, subtle awareness that you're not really aware of, that you're not recognizing, and you're not going to be able to put your finger on it because it's a very subtle level of consciousness. But that's that's the object of the eighth consciousness. Okay. So maybe that is enough for the morning. Maybe it's too much for the morning. Maybe I've overloaded you. Okay, so we will now, in just a moment, we will recite this morning we'll just recite the dedication for merit in English and Tibetan. And so please think to yourselves that you are dedicating all the merit of listening to and teaching the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings, so that they may all be made happy, they may all have lasting happiness, that they may be free of famine, epidemic, plagues, war, conflict of any kind, of any other sorts of suffering, that all sentient beings may swiftly achieve the state of Buddhahood, and until such time as they do, that they may be reborn in good places, have long and healthy lives, encountering the Dharma and progressing swiftly along the path. And so thinking in this way, please recite the dedication of merit. So this is in our printout, this is on the very last page. O sanam de tam jese pani tobne nye peranam pamchene Kegana chi bala chum Sibe toledo marshal. By this merit may I attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all wander from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you all again in a couple hours. I hope you have good, enjoyable lunches without being too attached to them.